On the morning of January 27, 2025, traders sitting at their desks on Wall Street watched something they had never seen before. NVIDIA's stock, the most valuable chip company on Earth, was falling. Fast. Not because of a bad earnings report. Not because of a scandal. Because of an app. An app built by a small team in Hangzhou, China. An app that had just become the #1 downloaded app in the United States, beating ChatGPT overnight. By the end of that single trading day, over $500 billion had been wiped from U.S. technology stocks. Presidents spoke about it. CEOs scrambled. Silicon Valley went quiet in a way it almost never does. And the company that caused all of it? Most people in America had never heard its name before that morning. This is the story of how a Chinese AI startup called DeepSeek walked into the most competitive industry on the planet, spent a fraction of what its rivals spent, and in a single night, made every major AI company question everything they thought they knew. To understand why DeepSeek hit so hard, you first need to understand what the AI industry had been telling itself for years. The story Silicon Valley had built was simple and expensive. More money means better AI. More chips means faster AI. More computing power means smarter AI. OpenAI had raised billions. Google had poured billions more into its AI division. Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, every major tech company was spending at a scale that most countries couldn't match. NVIDIA, the company that made the chips powering all of this, had become one of the most valuable companies in the world almost entirely because of this belief. The logic seemed unbreakable. If you wanted to compete in AI, you needed resources that only the biggest companies on Earth could provide. That assumption is exactly what DeepSeek destroyed. DeepSeek was not founded by a tech giant. It was not backed by a government program with unlimited funding. It was spun out of a Chinese quantitative hedge fund called Highflyer, founded by a man named Liang Wenfeng. Liang was not a household name. He was not a charismatic founder who gave TED Talks or appeared on magazine covers. He was a researcher who believed that the way Western companies were building AI was wasteful, and that there was a smarter path. Highflyer had been quietly stockpiling NVIDIA chips for years before the US government restricted chip exports to China. When those restrictions hit, DeepSeek had a limited supply of hardware to work with. That constraint, which should have been a disadvantage, became the thing that forced them to think differently. American AI labs had the luxury of throwing more chips at every problem. DeepSeek had to solve the same problems with less. So they did. In late 2024, DeepSeek released a model called V3. It was fast. It was capable. It quietly impressed the researchers who tested it, though it didn't make headlines outside technical circles. Then came January 20th, 2025. DeepSeek released a model called R1. R1 was not just fast. It was a reasoning model, meaning it could think through complex problems step by step, the same way OpenAI's most advanced models could. The benchmarks came back. Researchers ran the numbers again, because they didn't believe the first results. R1 matched OpenAI's most advanced reasoning model on multiple tests. Not closely, not almost. Matched it. And then came the detail that stopped Silicon Valley cold. The estimated cost to train DeepSeek, R1, was around $6 million. OpenAI, Google, and Meta had been spending hundreds of millions, in some cases billions, to train comparable models. $6 million. The AI industry had one central argument for why only the biggest companies could compete. It costs too much for anyone else to try. DeepSeek had just taken that argument and quietly set it on fire. By January 27th, when DeepSeek made its app publicly available and it surged to the top of the US App Store, Wall Street understood what had happened. If a small team in China could build a world-class AI model for a fraction of the cost, using chips that were less powerful than what American companies had access to, then the entire financial case for NVIDIA's dominance needed to be reconsidered. NVIDIA's shares fell by around 14% in a single session. For a company of its size, that single-day loss represented one of the largest destructions of stock market value in history. Google's parent company Alphabet fell. Microsoft fell. The companies that had spent the most on AI infrastructure, and whose valuations depended on that spending being necessary, all dropped. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, acknowledged that DeepSeek R1 was impressive. He called it invigorating to have a new competitor. Then he said his company would keep pushing forward on its own path. Mark Andreessen, one of Silicon Valley's most influential investors, called DeepSeek's release AI's Sputnik moment, a reference to the shock the United States felt in 1957 when the Soviet Union launched the first satellite into space before America could. The comparison landed for a reason. Because like Sputnik, DeepSeek was not just a technical achievement. It was a signal that the race was not as one-sided as it had appeared. A signal that the assumptions the industry had been operating on, that AI leadership required American resources, American infrastructure, American chips, were not as solid as they seemed. DeepSeek was also open source. Any researcher anywhere in the world could download the model, study it, build on it. That decision amplified everything. Within days, developers were pulling DeepSeek apart to understand how it worked. The techniques it used, particularly a method called mixture of experts, which activates only the parts of the model needed for a specific task rather than running the entire system at once, started appearing in conversations across every major AI lab. DeepSeek had not just released a competitive model. It had released a competitive model and then handed everyone the blueprints. The questions that followed were uncomfortable for the industry. Had American AI companies been spending too much? Were they using brute force where clever engineering would do? Had years of easy access to capital and computing power made them less efficient, not more? Nobody had a clean answer. The US government, which had been restricting chip exports to China specifically to slow Chinese AI development, now had to confront the possibility that those restrictions had not worked as intended and may have accidentally pushed Chinese researchers toward more efficient techniques. That irony was not lost on anyone paying attention. By the end of January 2025, DeepSeek had changed the conversation permanently. Not because it had beaten every American AI model in every test. It hadn't. Not because it had put NVIDIA out of business. It hadn't done that either, and analysts pointed out that if AI became cheaper and more accessible, demand for chips could actually increase over time. But it had proven one thing that could not be unproven. The belief that AI leadership required spending at a scale that only a handful of companies could afford. That belief was wrong. And once a belief like that is broken, it does not come back. On the morning of January 27, 2025, a Wall Street trader watching NVIDIA's stock fall in real time would have struggled to explain exactly what had happened. A small team in China, working with fewer resources than their competitors, had quietly built something that matched the best in the world, and then made it free. The AI industry had told a story about itself for years. A story about scale and cost, and the impossibility of competing without both. DeepSeek rewrote that story in a single night. The bigger question now is what that means for every company that built its future on the old version. Here is what I want to know from you. DeepSeek proved that constraints, less money, fewer chips, more pressure, can force better thinking. Do you believe the AI companies with the most resources are actually building the best AI? Or does having too much money make you lazy? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moments that quietly rewrite the rules, Ledger and Logic is where they are.